and share screen. Let's go to. Okay, so we went a little bit into page 22 last time. We told as we finished this really interesting story. Wait, no, sorry. Here we are. Here we go. Yeah, we finished with this story about rabbis being distressed that God wasn't, or that heaven wasn't giving them proper respect, and they were feeling very insecure because every week, no, was it? It was every day. Um, Heaven was sending messages. I guess instant messaging to Abba the bloodletter, who was a very pious guy and a very modest, thoughtful person, didn't hold a grudge towards anybody. But Abai and Rava, the two great scholars of their day, were getting it far less frequently. These I guess these what do they call these DMs or something that from heaven. So they were a little bit hurt. But now we continue with that same mode that really it's elevating the common person. Rabbi Broka Choza'ah Hava Shchiach Bishuka Deve Lefet. Rabbi Broka Choza'ah was often in the market of Beit Lefet, where he lived, and Hava Shchiach Eliyahu Gabe. Elijah was often there with him. He would see Elijah, and he would ask him, Amarle, Ika behai shuka bar alma da'ate. Is there anybody in this market who's worthy of the world to come? We have a lot of stories of Elijah showing up. The Talmud has a number of stories of Elijah showing up to rabbis and talking to them, and they ask him all types of questions. And so in this case, he wants to know, well, we're in the market today. Anybody here worthy of the world to come? And Elijah's answer is la, no. Oh, ad hachi v'hachi, although after a little while, chaza lehahu gavra dehava sayem misane ukame v'la ramechuta detechelta beglime. So he sees, in the meantime, it's Rabbi Baroka who saw a man who was wearing black shoes, which were told in the notes in the background here, this was a typical shoe, although there were differences in the number of straps and laces on various shoes, and social classes had specific shoes that they would wear, and Jews and Gentiles wore different shoes. Jews wore shoes with white straps, Gentiles wore shoes with black straps, and that obviously distinguished between Jews and Gentiles. And the sages were very strict with people who changed the color of their shoes in an effort to resemble Gentiles. It's kind of interesting. So this guy was wearing shoes that looked like a Gentile. And not only that, but he didn't have techelet on his fringes. Today, most people do not have techelet on their fringes. We lost the custom of how you made techelet was lost for hundreds and hundreds of years.
What is techelet?
Techelet is the blue string that the Torah tells us should be on the fringes. But most people today wear just plain white fringes, and that's because the techelet comes from a specific dye. It's not just blue. It comes from a specific dye that comes from some type of a water creature.
Something yellow or something.
Yeah, so for hundreds of years, we had no clue how to do it. The ingredients or the way to make it, the manufacturing process was lost. And being a conservative small c culture, the thought was better to not have it at all than to do it incorrectly. But only recently, I say the last 40 years, I think, maybe 30 years, it's a great story. Won't go into the details of it, but a great story of how archaeologists, scientists, Jewish scholars looking at the traditional texts, and fabric scientists realized how the dye was made. It comes from a a gland in a snail, and they knew they I think they've known for a long time that it comes from this snail, but they didn't know how it was made. And with the knowledge of fabric scientists, they figured out that it's the gland, the whatever the fluid that comes from this gland has to be oxidized in a certain way, and that turns it into a bluish purple color. So now you can buy, and that's exactly what I do. I wear the techelet on my tzitzit. So in any case, this guy didn't have it, and obviously we're talking about a time when Jews did still wear techelet, and he wasn't wearing it. So that was unusual. So the Elijah says to Rabbi Baroka, this guy who's dressed like a Gentile, he's worthy of the world to come. So of course, Rabbi Baroka is fascinated now. Rahat Batre, Amar le my ovadach. What do you do? And the man said, very, very mysterious guy. He says, Zil ha'idna, go away right now. Vital machar, come back tomorrow and I'll talk to you. So he comes back tomorrow. The next day he goes back to the market. He sees the guy and he says, what's your occupation? And the man said to him, I'm a prison guard, a Zandukana. Zandukana, and Steinsaltz tells us, is probably Zendankana, and it's derived from Iranian, meaning prison. Okay, so he's a prison guard. And I imprison the men separately and the women separately, and I place my bed between them so that they will not come to a transgression, to an isura, lidei isura. You can imagine these prisons, I guess they didn't have too many individual cells. And then not only that, ki chazena bat Yisrael, the havi nochrim Allah einaihu. When I see a Jewish woman, a bat Yisrael, that the Gentiles are, gazing at her. Masarna nafshai umatzelna la. I risk my life to save her. Yom achad havat na'ara me'orasa gaban dihavu ba nochrim einaihu. There was a young woman, she was betrothed. He knew that she was betrothed and that these Gentiles were attracted to her. So what did he do? He's very clever. Shkali durdaya de chamra ushdai la beshipula. So he took the dregs of red wine and he threw them on the lower part of the dress, and va'amri dash tanahi. Oh, she's menstruating, because they would leave her alone. That was taboo. So again, these are all interesting. How this is obviously Babylonian Talmud is being written in an area where Iran and Iraq are today, and they're have these borrowed words from Persian. But in any case, so he protected this woman with this subterfuge, and he says. So then Rabbi Baroka, and we saw this last week. Or is it coming up? I get all my stories, all the pages mixed up. But in any case, we have this situation which is very common. We're going to see where we have an unusual situation in the story. It doesn't seem to make sense. And then afterwards, well, why did you do that? So so he asks him, well, okay, so you're a Jewish jailer. Why do you wear black shoes, and why do you not have techelet on your fringes? So he says, so the man explains, since I come and go among Gentiles, I dress this way so they won't know that I'm a Jew. And when they issue a decree, gazre gizarta, right, a gezerah is a decree, I'm able to inform the sages, and then they pray for mercy, and the decree is annulled. See, again, we have this we've seen this in the stories where the sages sometimes have power to compel the heavens to act on their behalf. But first they've got to know that that they need to do that. And so that's what this person does. And then he also asks them, and when the reason that I said to you, what's your occupation? You said to me, we'll come back tomorrow. I can't tell you right now. And he said, at that moment, they had just issued a decree. And I said to myself, first, I must go and inform the sages so that they will pray for mercy over this matter. Now, ad hachi v'chachi, okay, again, time goes by, and atu hanach tre ache, two brothers show up. Amarle, this is Elijah again, hanach nami b'nei alma da'ate ninhu. These guys also have a share in the world to come. Interesting. Okay, why? Rabbi Baroka wants to know about these. What is it about these guys? My of daihu. What do you guys do? What's your occupation? And they said, Anashe bidoche anan. We are clowns, or jesters. We cheer the depressed. We cheer people up. Inami ki chazenan beitre deit lehu tigra bahadaihu. When we see two people who are quarreling amongst themselves, tarchinan ve'avdinan lahu shlama. We strive, we try to make sure that they have peace between the two of them, and that for that reason, they deserve the world to come. So, what do you make of these stories? And they, again, as I said, they follow this story where the two great rabbis were a little insulted that they're not getting direct messages from God as regularly as this doctor was getting. What do you make of the stories? What's the point?
I think it goes into much like with the blood letter, as far as you don't have to do what is, I guess for lack of a better term, what is textbook perfect, as long as you're doing everything that you can. You know, the jailer does what he can as far as separating that, and he does his own sort of thing. So he's sort of, I guess there's that whole hierarchy of both sin and mitzvot, as far as, well, it's okay that he doesn't have his blue strand as long as he is using it for the betterment of the Jewish people. Yeah. You know, what I really liked was at the end, the part that Steinsaltz had mentioned, as far as the you know, this behavior, for that behavior, one enjoys the profits of his actions in this world, but it's not diminished in the world to come. I think that references something that we get into now, as far as a fatigue of healthcare workers and stuff like that. Yeah. And mental health professionals. It's, especially with this past year of Corona, they mentioned the amount of stress that it goes under living in a profession of negativity. You know, whether, even if your life is okay, if you day in and day out as a social worker or as a therapist have to deal with depressed people and are constantly breaking up fights and stuff like that, it has a wear on you. Even though you get to enjoy this benefit of the better society, you yourself have taken a toll. And therefore it's not diminishing later, you know, in the world to come.
Right.
Well, they worked really hard for it, so we won't take it away in the next life.
Very nice. Yeah, I think what I'm always fascinated by the what would I call it? It's like the crosscuts of lessons in the Talmud. We're told so often, and it's such a prominent teaching in the Torah that Torah study is everything. That's the highest level in this hierarchy of values. It's more important than anything else. But then you have these stories which kind of undercut, or they go against the grain of that. Here, these are not scholars. I mean, the other story was obviously that the scholars are lesser on the level than the doctor who's acting out Torah at its highest level. Here we have two stories of people who are very common. These are commoners. These are people who you might overlook, or in the case of the jailer, maybe even question what kind of you dress like a Gentile, you're living like a Gentile, you're a jailer. What kind of a job is that for a nice Jewish boy? And yet they're the ones who belong in the world to come. And so on the one hand, we have this lesson, we're hit over the head repeatedly. It's not that it's not important, it's that it's the top lesson, the top value, Torah study. On the other hand, we have these other stories which say, well, you know what? There's people who live Torah, who act out those values of Torah, just as valuable as Torah scholars. So you have this kind of back and forth, and within the text itself. All right. Well, we go back to, in this case, the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was al elu matri'im bechol makom. Here are the calamities that occur where we're sounding alarm. You know, if this happens, you sound the alarm. Matri'im, right? We had that discussion whether you blow the shofar or you pray, but it's one of these things that you can just let people know. So here they are. It's al shida phone, which is blight. Let's see, where did they tell us what blight was? Blight here refers to disease known nowadays as corn smut. Well, it's anything with smut doesn't sound good. Okay, you got blight, mildew, locusts. That's arbe, v'chasil, and caterpillars. Obviously, another a bug that would, eat away at your plants, and chaya ra'ah, dangerous beasts. Now, Rabbi Akiva says for blight and mildew, they sound the alarm over any amount, b'chol shehu, any amount. Arbe v'chasil afilu lo nira ba'aretz ele kanaf echad matri'in alehen. For locust or caterpillar, even if only a single wing of one of these pests was seen, they sound the alarm, because it's understood that these things don't travel by themselves. They travel, if you see one, you're going to see thousands of them. The al chaya, and on the dangerous beast, al chaya ra'ah. Tanu Rabbanan chaya ra'ah she'amru bizman shehi mishulachat matri'in aleha, eina mishulachat ein matri'in aleha. So the term mishulachat here is outbreak. It's some kind of an abnormal outbreak. The term dangerous beast that they said is referring to a situation where there is a abnormal outbreak. The term mushulachat here, outbreak, which literally means dispatch, is based on the biblical expression, and the teeth of beasts I will send upon them. That's in the curses, in Deuteronomy, the tochecha. Apparently refers to the sudden outbreak of wild beasts in human habitations. An outbreak of this kind might be caused by a great hunger among these animals, possibly due to overpopulation, or in our world, when we're intruding on their habitat. When this happens, animals that generally refrain from any contact with people are liable to break into towns and attack them. Several sources indicate that another cause of this phenomenon is an epidemic of rabies among wild animals, which increases their level of aggression. Okay, so when there's an abnormal outbreak of these animals in a populated area, in this case, they sound the alarm over them. However, if it's not an unusual outbreak, they don't sound the alarm. Okay, so then we got to ask the question: what's an outbreak? What does that mean? Nir'et ba'ir mishulachat, basadeh eina mishulachat. If you see these wild animals in the city, roaming around the city, well, that's something to cause an alarm over, because that's unusual. They don't, obviously, it's like, as he explained down here, that either the humans are intruding on their habitat, and so therefore they're now coming into human areas, or there's for whatever reason they're starving, or they have this disease, they have rabies, they're not acting normally. But if it's in the field, if you see them in the field, well, that's not so unusual. That's where they live. That's their normal habitat. Also, bayom, oh, that's unusual. Mishulachat. Balayla eina mishulachat. If you see wild beasts in the evening, at night rather, when they're coming out to feed, that's not so unusual. So we get some more details. Okay, ratash nevene adam viratzta achrehen mishulachat. If the beast saw two people and chased after them, that's an outbreak. It's unusual. Usually beasts, when they see more than one person, usually the animals, even if they could kill a human, they're usually more scared of people. Nachbeta mipnehen eina mishulachat. But if it ran away from them, if it hid from them, it mishulachat. Tarfash nevene adam ve'achla echad mehem mishulachat. That's kind of interesting. If it attacked two people, but only ate one of them, that is a mishulachat. Because why'd they kill two people? If they were hungry, they would have. Why are they killing people they're not eating? But if it ate both of them, it's not an outbreak, as clearly the animals are hungry. So if it climbed on a roof and took a baby from its cradle, that's unusual. That's an outbreak. And that's the end of the Baraita. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute, you've given us a lot of confusing information. Hagufa kasha. Rat nirata ba'ir mishulachat. If they're seen in the city, if they're seen in the city, right, that's an outbreak. Loshna bayom veloshna balayla. The assumption then is, even if you see them at night in the city, that should be a mishulachat. But you've also told us daytime you see them, it's an outbreak. It's unusual, but nighttime it's not unusual. So how do we put this information together? It seems that there's it's a little confusing. Is it daytime, night versus nighttime? Is it city versus sadeh? But what if you combine? What if it's daytime in the city? Lo kasha, hachi kamar. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to fill in the language a little bit. Nirata ba'ir bayom mishulachat. If you see these wild animals roaming around your city in the daytime, that's unusual and that's considered an outbreak. But ba'ir balayla, that's eina mishulachat. So even though it's the city, it's not so unusual at nighttime because that's when they normally would go out to feed. Eina mi basadeh afilu bayom eina mishulachat. And likewise, if you see the animals in the field, even during the daytime, that's not so unusual. That's their habitat. So that's not considered an outbreak. And obviously at nighttime, it's not considered an outbreak. Okay, ra'ata shnei v'nei adam v'ratzta achrehen mishulachat. They see two people. If the wild animal sees two people and it chases after them, that's considered unusual. Ha-omedet eina mishulachat. Thus, the assumption is if the animal is just standing there and you see when two people are out there and they see the animal, he's just standing there, that's not reason to call for an alarm. Eina mishulachat. V'hadarva amra, but you also said nechbeita mipnehem eina mishulachat. But you also said if they hide from them, that's not an outbreak. So the assumption is if they don't hide from them and they're just standing there, isn't that a concern? Shouldn't we cause an outbreak? Okay, Gemara is going to fill us in again on the language. This is what we meant. Lo kasha. Kan basadeh hasmucha la'agam, kan basadeh she'ina smucha la'agam. Now I think if I remember correctly, this was a mistake. Wait, maybe it's the next one. All right, well, let's see. This is not difficult. Okay, the two sections of the Baraita are different situations. In one case where we're concerned, the animal is standing in a field near a marsh. Wait. For the views on this field. Yeah, I think conversely, where it is not an outbreak, yeah, see, I think he got it backwards here. It's basadeh hasmucha la'agam. A sadeh, which is close to a marsh, which is the animal's natural habitat, would not be an outbreak. If you just see him standing there, that's not because then he could run into the marsh. The concern would be if he was standing in a field that's not near a marsh. Since here he has nowhere to run, standing demonstrates an natural lack of fear. So you should call it an alarm. That is an outbreak. I think you got it backwards here. So when it's standing near a marsh, that's not unusual. We're not too worried because he could hide if he wanted to. He could run away if you came too close. But if it's not near a marsh, then that's concerning because what's the animal doing out in the middle of a field where there's nowhere to run? Also, tarfa shnei v'nei adam ki echad v'achla echad mehem, you said, in a case where the animal kills two people, but only one of them's eaten, means that he's not that hungry. He killed one of them just to kill. And that's a concern. Shneihem einam, but if he ate both of them, it's not mushlachat. He obviously killed for food. Have amart afilu ratzta. But didn't you also say that even if the animal merely chased after two people, it's also an outbreak, right? So Rav Papa said, when that ruling of a beast that tore apart two people is taught, it was referring to an animal once again in a marsh. Since it's in its own habitat, it's natural for a territorial beast to attack. So even if he only ate one or he just killed both of them, that's not so unusual. So again, the Gemara is trying to, and well, let's go to the third one, then we'll draw some conclusions.
Before we do that,
Yeah.
Now, is this discussion of the marsh in the Baraita, or are they supplying this?
No,
This
the
one-
marsh.
A clarification.
Oh, right. No. This is their understanding. What about a?
It-
No, wait, no. Sorry. Where's the Baraita? No, this is they're trying to make sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So they're reading this into the text.
Right.
Yeah.
To make sense of it.
Yeah.
And we'll just read one more. Gufa alta legag v'nat latinok me arisa mishulachat. If an animal comes onto a person's house and grabs a baby, which is very unusual, that they would go that close and grab the child, that's an outbreak. But the response is, well, obviously, I mean, anytime you have dangerous animals coming into your house, well, here it's climbed the roof, but taking babies from cradles, we're concerned. How could it be that you would ever be questioned? So Rav Papa said, well, it's because the other case might be kechuche detzaide, referring to a hunter's hideout. Since this hut is in a wild area, one might have thought that it's natural for a beast to attack, and therefore the Baraita teaches in any case that's reason for an outbreak. That's reason for a warning. So this is a case, I mean, why, I guess, I'm thinking, if the hunter going out hunting deer is bringing his little baby out there and putting it in the cradle on the top of his blind, that doesn't sound very safe. But we're probably talking about you're living in the middle of the forest where there's lots of dangerous animals, and because you're hunting, if an animal in that case attacks and comes into that area where, again, this is a normal habitat, you might say, oh, well, that's the normal habitat. But Rav Papa is suggesting that the Baraita is telling us, no, in that case, if the baby is taken from its crib, even if you're in a natural habitat, that's a cause for alarm, because it seems that the sages know that there are barriers, there's borders that animals, even dangerous animals, don't cross. And so what we're talking about when we cause an alarm to go out to the community, these are situations where animals are not acting in their normal way. If an animal is seen at night, even in the city, it's not that unusual. That's the time that animals go out to look for prey. What's weird is if it's the daytime, and it's weird if it's in the city. It's weird if it's not anywhere near a natural, like in this case, a marsh, a natural habitat where they would normally be. It's not so weird if they're standing in a field that's not near a marsh. Same thing with
I'm wondering about the methodologies here. I know when I studied physics, I was taught that it can frequently be enlightening to explore limiting cases, explore really extreme cases.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if they aren't, I mean, they don't seem to enunciate this as a principle, but I'm wondering if they aren't following that.
Oh, of extreme, yeah, what's
Like
like,
the hunter's blind with the baby in a cradle on top.
yeah, I mean, it could be. It could also be that they, this was the one, let's go back up here. It didn't have there was no parallel case, right? There, let's see, what was it? It's not at night. Yeah, see, in each of these other cases also you have two possibilities. The animal saw two humans and it ran after them,
Mhm.
saw two humans and it hid from them. Attacked two humans, ate one of them. We know it was about food. In this case, they attacked two humans and ate both of them. And here you have he went up on the roof to the baby. There's no Einam Mishulachat case. So it could also be that he's trying to fill in, well, obviously, I mean, if that's so obvious, why would you have to teach that?
Yeah.
And the answer would be, well, here, let's come up with a case which is a little more extreme, that they need to be taught, that's unique.
To a certain extent, this is almost identical to what we use at scout camp. When I went to scout camp, it was in northern Wisconsin, and bears are really, as far as dangerous beasts go.
Yeah.
We would occasionally get bears, and it is very similar to whether or not we just tell people, hey, we saw bears in this area, so be careful, or whether we actually have to take some action as far as setting up a trap, moving people away. If it's close to a populated area like a campsite where people are staying, do we move them? Completely, stuff like that. And it's a lot of the same sort of thing. Was it in a populated area, or was it in an area where nobody really goes and somebody just saw it? Did it run off as soon as we saw it, or did it stick around and check out the people who reported seeing a bear in that area? And it's all very, minus the whole baby thing, it's very much the same sort of policy. We have these lines where we are in the middle of the woods and we know that, so this is the bear's house that we just happen to be visiting for the summer, and we have to set up these lines of practicality. This will be our spot, and then the bears have all the rest. And then how do we want to be respectful of nature, but at the same time, we can't just let people get mauled by bears and stuff, that kind of thing. With the whole blind aspect, I don't know how historically accurate it would be, but the only thing I could imagine, and the baby thing is just weird. I wouldn't imagine it as a modern hunting blind now, where it's on your property or on a place that you go frequent, and it's very small, and it's maybe big enough for you and like one other hunting buddy or something like that. I imagine something similar to a sukkah, where you're going out for a while, and
Good point.
if it requires you bringing along your family, and it says baby, small child, I think would be more accurate. You're bringing out your family, we need to go hunting for the next week to get enough meat for a while, to supply the butcher or themselves or something like that. Maybe that would be an instance where, I wasn't paying attention. I fell asleep. It was early morning and a mountain lion wandered off with my kid, that sort of thing. That's probably the closest thing to practicality for that sort of story.
Although now that you're saying that, it immediately, and I don't know the answer to this, is who's hunting? You're not allowed to eat hunted animals. So what do they hunt? I mean, maybe they're not hunting like we think of hunting, because you can catch a deer. I guess that's it, but you'd have to trap it, I guess. Okay, so I guess there are some animals you could trap and eat. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is now with the sounding alarm for sword, which is understood as, troops, either, we'll see in a moment. Tanu Rabbanan, Cherav she'amru eino tzarich lomar cherav she'eino shel shalom, ela afilu cherav shel shalom. So what's this cherav shel shalom? Cherev shel shalom is a sword of peace, is a case where, I mean, obviously a sword that's not for peace is you're being besieged by an enemy. But a sword of peace is a case where armies are passing through your territory, not intending to wage war against you. They're just going to their enemies somewhere else. Even that is an example. Even then you would sound the alarm. You want to be very concerned because you never know what's going to happen. And here's an example, as you don't have a greater example of a sword of peace than Pharaoh Necho. Pharaoh Necho lived at the time of King Josiah, one of the great kings. There weren't a lot of great kings after David and Solomon, and Josiah is one of them. He passed through Eretz Yisrael to wage war on Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, who was, trouncing the whole Middle East. And Pharaoh Necho went to meet him in war. Nevertheless, King Josiah stumbled in this matter, as it's stated. And here's the verse from Chronicles. He sent ambassadors to him saying, this is Necho sent ambassadors to Josiah, what have I do with you? What have I do with you, King of Judea? I do not come against you this day, but against the house with which I am at war. And God has commanded me to make haste, forbear from meddling with God who is with me, so God will not destroy you. Shows clearly Necho had no intention of fighting Josiah. So wait a minute, the Gemara then asks, well, what does this phrase mean, Elohim asher imi? This is kind of unusual. What do you mean, God is with you? God, since when is God with Egyptian emperors? Rav Yehuda said that Rav said this is referring to Necho's idolatry, which he brought for assistance. It wasn't Elohim as in God, Hashem, but Elohim meaning multiple gods. The God that is with me in my possession. And this gave license for Josiah because he said, Ho'il v'ka batach b'avodah zarah yachel nale. Because this guy is trusts in his idolatry, and one of Josiah's great acts was he was one of the few kings who basically went out and destroyed the idolatrous practices that the Israelites were engaging in, and he centralized the worship in the temple. Supposedly he's the one who found the book of Deuteronomy, or under his reign, the book of Deuteronomy was found. And that's what he used to legitimize going out and destroying all these other altars. And the Jews were praying to the local gods. So it makes sense. He says that Josiah would say, okay, I've got him. I can destroy him because he's trusting in these idols. But it didn't work out that way. Vayoru ayorim lemelech Yoshiyahu vayomer hamelech lavadav haviruni ki hechaleti me'od. He was seriously wounded when the Egyptian archers shot at King Josiah and his army when they went after Pharaoh Necho. And he was wounded and he died. And what is the meaning of the phrase, for I am seriously wounded? Rav Yehuda Marav Melamed She'asu Kol Gufo Kichvara. He made his entire body like a sieve. He had a lot of arrows in him. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Mipnei Man Enash Yoshiyahu. This is a good question, because if Yoshiyahu is one of the good kings, why was he punished? I mean, with the assumption being, why else would he have gotten killed before his time? He hadn't been king that long. And the answer is given, Jeremiah was a prophet at this time, and he should have consulted with the prophet Jeremiah. We have a number of stories where the kings get into trouble by not consulting with the prophets of their day. King Hezekiah gets in trouble for not consulting with Isaiah. Here in this case, Josiah with Jeremiah. He didn't consult with him. How did Josiah interpret the verses of Torah? How did they lead him to go to war? Because the verse states, neither shall, but it says, V'cherev lo ta'avor ba'artzachem. The Torah says you're not supposed to let a sword go through the land. So he was doing what he thought was the right thing to do. My cherev. So what does it mean, cherev? Ilema cherev she'ena shel shalom. If the assumption is a cherev that, of your enemy, not of peace, v'haktiv v'natati shalom ba'aretz. It's written a little bit later, I will give peace in the land. So therefore, you don't have to, obviously in a case where it's your enemy and you go fight, God will support you. Ella afilu shel shalom v'hu eino yodea she'ein doro domeh yafeh. Rather, the verse must mean that even a sword of peace should not pass through the land. And Josiah sought to prevent this occurrence in fulfillment of the blessing. That was, he thought he was doing the right thing. But he didn't know that his generation didn't merit these blessings. And he would therefore not receive divine assistance. So it wasn't Josiah's fault. It was all of his people's fault. Don't blame Josiah.
These seem to be two quite different interpretations.
Yeah.
It was his fault because he didn't consult with Jeremiah.
Right, exactly, right. So in one case,
It
right,
wasn't his fault because his generation was unfair. The whole generation was unfair.
right, exactly. Isn't that interesting? So you have two different responses. One, it was his fault. The other, it couldn't have helped himself. He was doing the right thing, but the generation was responsible, which is, of course, a lesson that when bad things happen and good people die, when the great sages of the generation are killed, we blame it was the generation's fault. It wasn't the sages' fault, right? Both of these tendencies are used as apologetics for when bad things happen to good leaders.
I'm surprised it doesn't trace back to the other lessons of humbleness and stuff in terms of, well, more so the punishment is, it's okay if I let them march through because worst case scenario is they turn on me, but because they're idolaters, I can defeat them. I think that level of arrogance more so got him killed than anything else. The notion that, God is on my side. So worst comes to worst, even if I break this one rule, the consequences I can overcome. I think that more did him in than anything, than beyond anything else.
But now this is the interpretation of the Gemara.
Right. Right. And
behavior on the part of Josiah. Some of them at least are assuming that that's what he said.
Right. Now, also remember that the Talmud is trying to deal with something that we know that happened. The Bible tells us that Josiah did die.
Right.
Even though he was a good king, he died in essentially before his time. And why? Why did that happen? So this is another example of attempting to come up with answers for why, bad things happen. And we had two. Now here, as if in case the Shmuel or Rabbi Yochanan's answer, where Josiah was basically being punished, just in case you thought that Josiah, there was some besmirching of his character, we have another element here. When Josiah was dying, Jeremiah saw his lips moving. Perhaps Jeremiah said, heaven forbid, he's saying something improper, complaining about God's judgment on account of his great distress. Now, I have to say, in the text here, this may be the author of the text speaking on behalf of the readers, right? We're saying that. Why did he die? How could he have died? That's not fair. And we would be, it's not fair. So we understand if Josiah was complaining that this isn't fair. Well, just so you know, Jeremiah bent over and heard that he was justifying God's judgment. He was tziduk hadin, matzdik alei dina. We call this tziduk hadin, justifying God's judgment. Basically, it's a statement of theodicy. The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his word. And at that moment, Jeremiah began his eulogy. The breath of our nostrils, the anointing of the Lord was trapped in their pits. Okay, so you know what? Sometimes sad things happen. And we don't understand why, but God knows better than we do. Okay, here we go back to the Mishnah. An incident occurred in which the elders descended from Jerusalem to their cities and decreed a fast throughout the land because a small amount of blight was seen in Ashkelon, and it was enough to fill the mouth of an oven. So now we get a little bit of discussion of measurements. Well, what does that mean? Enough grain to fill an entire, does it mean enough grain to fill an entire oven, which would be a lot? Maybe it's enough to prepare bread, which goes in the oven. You know, these are, I don't know if you've ever seen some of these ovens that they make pita in. They basically throw the dough up against the wall of the oven and it cooks. So that's not that as much, right? So it's not as much, it's a smaller amount. Well, here's the answer. Tashma kimulo pi tanur. Enough to fill the mouth of an oven. This indicates that the bread referred to does not fill the entire oven, but covers the mouth of the oven, which is probably much smaller than the amount of the oven. And still you can raise the dilemma before them. Is the Mishnah referring to the bread, to the bread of the cover of the oven? Perhaps it's referring to a row of bread around the mouth of the oven? Teku, we don't know. Can't they don't really know exactly how much. It's a small amount of blight that's enough for us to cause call forth for the alarm. Here's another one. The Mishnah said, and furthermore, they decreed a fast because the wolves had eaten 2 children. Oh yeah, this was a little bit gross. Ula said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadok, an incident occurred in which the wolves swallowed 2 children and excreted them. And the incident came before the sages for a ruling. Ritual impurity is really a big deal for the rabbis. So if they if they were swallowed whole and they went through the digestive tract, are the remains do they cause impurity? And the answer is the flesh, ritually pure of the children as it had been digested, but the bones of the children, the intact bones, were ritually impure. I can't really go into too much detail about that because the laws are complicated. I don't really understand them. I think did they have any? He didn't even give us notes on this, did he? No. Well, here, yeah, notes. Wool. So this literally does not mean that they swallowed them whole. Rather, they did not leave behind any physical remains of their bodies. The halakha problem concerns the flesh left on the corpses. Does it still have the status of flesh? Because the flesh would normally be considered causing impurity. That flesh on bones is what causes the impurity, and here it's saying that the flesh is ritually pure. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
I had a question back on talking about Josiah.
Okay.
There's this quote from Lamentations, which it claims is a deathbed quote from him. And I'm not that familiar with Lamentations, but I just checked, and Josiah is nowhere mentioned in the entire book.
Right. No, exactly. What it's saying here is they're just using this quotation that when Josiah was dying, he referred to this verse, which,
but there's no textual evidence.
Right. The only connection really between Lamentations and this story would be that tradition tells us Jeremiah is the author of Lamentations.
Okay.
That's the connection. But otherwise, it hasn't occurred yet, right? Josiah was king. Nebuchadnezzar had not destroyed Jerusalem yet.
Right.
The whole timeline is off.
Josiah is dead before.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
What they wanted is that the quotation that the Lord is righteous, even though Josiah, it wasn't fair that Josiah got killed. I mean, he was doing the right thing, but nevertheless, he declared God's righteousness.
But they've read into this that this is not Josiah.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. So here, the Mishnah further taught, following the following calamities, they sound the alarm even on Shabbat. And here it's for a city surrounded by Gentile troops, for a place in danger of being flooded by a river, a ship that's tossed about by sea. The sages taught in a case of a city that's surrounded by Gentile troops or a river that is swelled beyond its banks, this also applies both to a ship tossed about at sea and an individual who's being pursued by Gentiles, so they're adding to this, or by thieves, or by an evil spirit, which may lead him to harm himself. They sound the alarm even on Shabbat. And in all these cases, an individual is permitted to afflict himself by fasting to annul the evil decrees against him. So, because here the question would be, where's the halacha here? On Shabbat. Okay, so here they say the issue is not about Shabbat. At least his note says it's not about Shabbat. But the question is, or that it's permissible for an individual to afflict himself by fasting when he has these very negative things occurring to him. I don't think it's speaking specifically about being on the ship at that moment or being pursued at that moment. I think it has to be that, there's a situation where he's been in danger.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that if one were pursued by thieves or others.
Yeah, you're not going to stop and say, well,
fasting would come to mind.
Yeah. But I think it's a situation where, he has been followed or he is in danger. But notice that Rabbi Yossi has a different opinion. An individual, you shouldn't afflict yourself by fasting, because in that case, you're going to be too weak to in these cases, at least, I guess, fight back. And those beings won't have mercy on them. So, you're being chased by other people, and what's to say that by fasting and weakening yourself, they're going to feel bad for you? And then Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, my taima de Rabbi Yossi. What was the reason that Rabbi Yossi gave this response? And here we have a verse in Genesis. Man became a living soul. Vayihi hadam lenefesh chaya. Nishama shenatati b'cha hechayeha. You're supposed to do everything possible to sustain your soul. That's Rabbi Yossi's interpretation. It's a very good one. So when we're in a dangerous situation, it's not always the best idea to fast. We've seen some cases it might be. We saw about dreams. You have a bad dream, it's okay to fast to get rid of the dream and the negative psychological fears. But in these other cases where you're in danger, fasting is not necessarily such a good idea. Don't do that. You put yourself in more danger.
I find it to be more of a, helping yourself versus asking for spiritual help, sort of thing. When it comes to dreams, because they're intangible, it's okay to fast. But these are real world problems that you have. And fasting and hoping for divine interference is not, no, stop it. Like, really, focus, get yourself right, figure out what you need to do, and stop waiting for God to come and intervene on your behalf. Versus a dream, which is more intangible, there isn't really anything inherently you can do about it, because dreams are so full of metaphors and signs and portents and stuff like that. Well, having a run of bad luck, being on a ship that got almost crashed, or being pursued, or that sort of thing. You have real problems that need real, responses. You can't just fast and hope that they'll go away.
Good. Here we go back to the Mishnah. Shimon Hatiboni Omer Af al Hadever. We even cry out on Shabbat for pestilence. The rabbis, though, the majority opinion was opposed. So the sages had a question about it. Does this mean that the rabbis did not agree with him regard to crying out just on Shabbat because of pestilence? Or do you never cry out for pestilence? Is that just not serious enough to have a communal alarm raised. The Gemara answers come in here as it is taught in this Baraita. So the Baraita fills in some information for us. Matri'in al dever b'Shabbat ve'ein sarich lomar b'chol. One cries out for a plague of pestilence on Shabbat, and obviously you would do it for the weekdays. Rabbi Chanan ben Pitom, Talmido shel Rabbi Akiva, Mishum Rabbi Akiva Omer ein matri'in al dever kol ikar. So, according to Rabbi Chanan ben Pitom, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva Akiva's teaching was one doesn't cry out for pestilence at all. So we see here that the opinion attributed to the rabbis, as if that was the majority, it was in fact Rabbi Akiva. And it was his opinion that the rabbis followed in the Mishnah. What's useful here, I suppose, in later halachic reasoning, is if it's Rabbi Akiva's opinion alone, even if the rabbis agreed to it, it would give you license to follow Shimon the Timnite in future generations. You could say, well, that was Rabbi Akiva's opinion. That's a single opinion, and we can follow Rabbi Shimon. Our decision is to follow Rabbi Shimon. I think we're finishing up here. This is the end, right? Oh, yeah. All right, the Mishnah further states that they sound the alarm on account of any trouble that should not befall the community, meaning that it may it not befall our community. It's a euphemism, except for an overabundance of rain. Oh yeah, so the only time you don't cry out, you don't have an alarm, is when you have too much rain. Because the sages taught, my timer, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Lafisha Ein Mit Palalim Al Rov Hatuva. It says you don't, because you don't pray over an excess of good. Too much good, you got too much of a salary raise. You got too much, you had too much good food. You don't cry out you don't send out the alarm. Because rain is usually good, right? However, so Rabbi Yochanan said, where do we derive that we don't pray over an excess of good? It is stated, bring the whole tithe into the storeroom. This is from Malachi, that there may be food in my house, and test me now by this, said the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing, that there shall be more than sufficiency. Now that phrase, let me just look it up here. That phrase, more than sufficiency, is in the Hebrew, a bracha ad belidai. So they're gonna, that's the Hebrew. He doesn't have the whole verse in here. Ad belidai. What does it mean? How do we understand that ad belidai? So he does a play on words in Rabbi Bar Chama. It means that the abundance will be so great that your lips will be worn out. Yivlu. See, ad belidai sounds like ad sheyivlu. Your lips will be worn out from saying the word die enough. In other words, even when a blessing is delivered in gross excess, one should not pray for it to cease, as the verse blesses the people with an excess. Rami Bar Rav Yud says, well, wait a minute, we got limitations here. Uvagola matri'ina laha. Actually, in the case of Babylonia, we do sound the alarm over excessive rain. Seinzel says the reason is that Babylonia is a low-lying region where excessive rain poses a danger. If you remember, we did see this, that Babylonia was a place where you don't even need that much rain, just because the geography is such that there's just a lot of moisture to grow food. So you don't really need that much rain. And they have rivers, also they have irrigation channels that help. So if in Babylonia, it actually would be a problem if you had too much rain. And that's taught in the Baraita. In a year whose rains are abundant, the members of the priestly watch in the temple would send a message to the members of the non-priestly watch. These are the lay people who were part of the group. Cast your eyes care about put, focus on the needs of your brothers in diaspora so that their houses should not collapse from excessive rain and become their graves. Well, how much rain is that? Shalu et Rabbi Eliezer. Ad hechen geshamim yordim v'yitpalalu shelo yardu. How much is that? Amar lahem kadeshi ya'amod adam b'keren ofel v'yishachshech raglav b'mayim v'hatanya yadav raglav ki yadav kamina. Okay, this is a kind of a strange comparison, because how much is too much rain? So if it's so much rain that a person could stand on Keren Ophel, which was this huge cliff, and dip his feet in the water or dip his feet in his hands, that's too much water. The reason why I say it's a strange comparison is, well, Keren Ophel's in the land of Israel, and they're talking about Babylonia. It would be good if we had a reference to Babylonia, too much rain. But they gave us a rain from Keren Ophel, and then what is that? I think I start off next week's with this. Well, Keren Ophel is so high up, it would be so much rain because it's so high up that when Rabbi Bar Bar Chana looked down from the top of Keren Ophel and he saw an Arab person below, it looked like it was a worm. That's how high up he was. And the perspective was that the Arab person holding a spear on a horse or camel, I guess, was teensy weensy. So that's how big Keren Ophel is. But at least here, the background that the Steinsaltz gives us, the Keren Ophel is in Jerusalem. So that's as I say, that's kind of an odd measurement for too much rain in Babylonia, but it tells you a lot of rain. Okay.
So much rain since now.
Yeah. So listen, we're on, next week we do page 23. We've got, I believe, 8 more dapim. So, and I'm going to take June off. So we've got, I think, 4 more Sundays, and then we'll finish. So come July, we will finish we will have a siyum. Very exciting. So maybe by that point we can even have our siyum here. So we can actually have food and refreshments here in the synagogue. Okay, very good. So we'll, have a good week, everybody. And we will see you all next week.
Thank you, Rob.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yain Cooper is teaching her courses online, so she could be anywhere in the world.
Okay. All right. Very good.
I mean,
All right.
that's all I can figure out.
Okay. All right. I'll have to email, see if they moved. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Take care.